Hey everyone, it's Monica May, and this is One Take Live. I missed you guys last week, and I thank my guest tonight for giving me a redo. She is the state attorney here for the state of Florida, the Ninth Judicial Circuit. That means she is the chief prosecutor, the second African American female to hold that position, first one from the Caribbean, and my very first guest on One Take Live when we began. And we do say hello, good evening. Thank you for racing home to do this with us this evening, Monique Worrell. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm so well and so happy to be back with you.
Listen, when we first decided to get together last year, we said, okay, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And do you remember our conversation, Monique?
I do. I was sharing my news with you about me running for state attorney, and you were sharing your news with me about your new show, One Take. And I was so honored to be your first guest.
And we did it actually here by the pool.
By the pool.
I really just wanted to have a good girl conversation with you, but a political one and a heart-to-heart one. And then what transpired after that was an opportunity I'll never forget. You asked me to commentate a very big interview for you on StreamYard. And from there, our relationship grew, but it also opened up the door for many other interviews. And I just want to say thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. As I shared with you when I was your guest on the first show, I have been a fan of yours for many years. And to call you and have you commentate the panel with Van Jones and I was just a blessing and an honor to me. And then to subsequently have you come and be the MC for my inauguration was just equally an honor. So I am thankful to you for just always being there when it really matters.
Thank you so much. So in the time it took for you to go on the trail, just to get up and just say, this is what I'm interested in doing, and interview after interview and debate after debate after debate, criminal justice reform was what you stood on. In the 6 months that you've had this job, because it's been 6 months now, November to now, how has it been in trying to really stand on getting that pushed forward, as important as it is?
So criminal justice reform is something that I believe is an area that much of the country can unite on. And that's why I was elected to become state attorney. However, the concept of criminal justice reform is one thing. Actually putting it into practice is something completely different. And the reason is because it's not just up to me. I am but one of many players in a system that includes law enforcement, that includes the defense bar, that includes the judiciary, as well as other agencies. So while I have an idea and a concept and a plan and a vision for the things that I want to implement, these other agencies also play a role in that. And if they're not on board, it certainly makes the reform much more challenging.
So in so doing, and we knew that this was going to be the way, what are some ways that we can help you as a community, as a state? You cover almost 1.4 million people that you have to take care of. What can some of us do to stand up to say, listen, this is important?
You know, that's a really important question, and one that I'm really glad you asked, because we're in a cancel culture. So I'm 6 months in, almost 6 months in. On the 5th, I'll be 6 months in to this job. And already there are, people who want to cancel me because one thing that I've done doesn't align with how they think it should go. Or they're impatient. The things that I'm doing aren't happening fast enough. I read a letter from someone who said today, you ran and said that you were going to reform the criminal justice system, but I just want to tell you that you haven't. Well, hold on, it's been 6 months.
Okay. Okay.
So I guess when I was running, I should have given a timeline for how long this would take. But I just want to remind people to think of how long it took us to get here, right? When I ran, I said that we can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. And by continue to do the same thing, I mean the same thing that we've been doing for decades, if not centuries in this country. So certainly it's unrealistic to expect that things are going to change drastically within a time span of 6 months. So that same support, that same energy that the community showed when I campaigned, I need them to continue with that support and that same energy and understand that it won't happen overnight, that this is a process, and that and to trust that when I told you that I was going to do something, that I am in fact going to do it, but that these are things that are going to take time. There are processes that have to be put in place. And there's a whole culture that has to be changed in order to achieve the changes that I set out to do.
When you talk about that culture that has to be changed, what exactly do you mean?
So there's a culture within the state attorney's office itself. It is hiring new assistant state attorneys and changing the thought process of existing state attorneys on what our goal is, on what our focus is, changing the mentality that we measure success by the number of convictions and the number of years that we can incarcerate people for, to understanding that as a community, we need to look at a more holistic approach, an end result. What is this sentence going to do to make us stronger and safer as a community? And if the answer is it's just going to warehouse this individual for a few months or a few years, then under my administration, that is not an acceptable measure of success. The answer has to be that there's going to be some change that will come from whatever this sentence is that will lead to an outcome that's going to be beneficial for our community.
And for that individual, because you mentioned that too, that there were changes in the system that you wanted to make so that it would really benefit an offender also, and not in necessarily that good kumbaya kind of way, but how is it going to make a difference for them as well, so that they don't become that recidivist, so that they don't become someone who is not an integral part of our community.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely right. Is that we all win when we can turn someone's life around, when we can stop someone from engaging in criminal behavior and instead become a productive member of society. And I want to be clear, this isn't in reference to violent individuals. This isn't in reference to those individuals who wreak havoc on our communities and engage in gun violence that leads to, the multiple fatalities that we've been seeing, across our community and across the nation, really, in an increased amount over the last year. I'm talking about homeless individuals. I'm talking about addicted individuals. I'm talking about individuals who suffer from mental health issues. I'm talking about children in our system who really just need to be put on the right track. These are the individuals that I'm talking about. There's a place for people who commit murder. Let me be very clear about that. There's a place for people who endanger the lives, the safety, and the well-being of the members of our community. So when I say, we need to implement reform, I'm talking about those individuals that I mentioned earlier, that we need to start doing things differently. Because if we look at the majority of our prison population, it's not the violent offenders. It's individuals who are in the categories that I mentioned previously.
So what did you inherit that was a good thing, that was helpful toward your criminal justice reform ideals? And what do you think you inherited that made it a little bit harder?
Sure. So my predecessor, the Honorable Aramis Ayala, was a reform prosecutor before reform prosecution was a thing. When she ran in 2016, this concept of reform prosecutor wasn't a platform that you could run on. It was something that came about as a result of her campaign, as well as some other prosecutors who ran nationally during that time. So I inherited the structure of reform prosecution. And now it was for me to build upon what she began when being a reform prosecutor wasn't a thing.
And so now, when you all switch positions, do you keep her staff? What happens with that? Because I know that when you're trying to make change, it's not always easy with people that have been working previously to you coming on board.
So I inherited some really good people who are open to reform and ready to help to make the changes in the system that are going to build stronger, safer communities, as well as some other individuals who were not. So it was there were some people at the very beginning of my administration who had to leave because they just weren't going to be on board with my ideology. And even after I took office, there were people who left because they weren't on board with my ideology, but that was to be expected.
So in moving toward criminal justice reform, and there were some other things that you campaigned on as well, where do you see your progress in terms of a timeline? And that's going to be a difficult question because, yeah, it is. Because right now, people are saying it's moving too slow. If we've been in 6 months, and I'm sure this is how the president feels too. There's some things that he has rallied on that were so good, and that's what got him there. And then you realize that you do need your team around you, your troops around you, people who are like-minded, people who want to push the envelope with you as opposed to opening it up and just, whatever. So if you had to say, okay, give me another year and a half, another 12 months, I don't know if that's fair to you, but what do you think? Because you still move forward.
Right. So what I'd like to do is point to what we have accomplished in 6 months, because I think that we accomplished a lot. In our first 30 days, we rolled out the community health and safety plan that dealt with helping to stop the spread of COVID by not incarcerating people who weren't a danger to society. At that very moment when I took office, the Orange County Jail had a COVID outbreak. And there were individuals who were sitting in the jail who were there for non-violent offenses, and there was no reason to expose them to the COVID virus, particularly when the studies and research had shown us that incarcerated people were 4 times more likely to contract COVID-19 and twice as likely to die as a result of COVID-19. So we rolled out the community health and safety plan that gave our assistant state attorneys guidelines for what they should do, how they should deal with people who are incarcerated and whether or not people should be incarcerated, how they should resolve cases quickly to limit the number of times that people had to come back to court, what we should do with requests for asking for bond and bail and community release, all aimed at community safety. Because what happens is when you have, people who are incarcerated, the jail was a petri dish for the spread of COVID-19, not just internally among those who are incarcerated, but also among the staff and the individuals who worked there who would then bring COVID back into the community. So within our first 30 days, we put together a comprehensive plan that would address that and give our prosecutors guidance on how they should be trying to resolve cases in an effort to keep COVID-19 in mind. The next thing that we did was we rolled out our death penalty policy. That was a huge thing. People wanted to know what we were going to do. As I was being sworn in, there was an issue dealing with cases that the death notices had been taken back by the previous state attorney. So I had to move quickly and put together a policy so that the public, as well as law enforcement in the community and the prosecutors, could know how death penalty cases would be handled.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you want to go ahead, jump in?
No, I was just we are, no, keep going. I wanted you to keep finishing that thought.
Okay. We also met with each law enforcement agency. There are 19 here in this jurisdiction. I met with the chiefs of all of the law enforcement agencies so that we could develop a relationship and see where we have commonalities so that I could express to them some concerns that I had, as well as the things that I intended to accomplish within my term as state attorney, to see where we could find our commonalities and work together despite any differences that we might have had. I also put out my officer-involved critical incident policy so that the community, as well as law enforcement, could understand how we intend to respond to officers' uses of deadly force and how we were going to investigate those and what the process would be for how we would deal with those. So it was very important to me that I put policies in place before I started acting on things so that I could be consistent throughout my entire tenure as state attorney, and that the public, as well as law enforcement and other agencies, could know what they could expect from my agency. We've also put together our community engagement committee so that members of the public can engage with us to let us know what their expectations are of our office. So these are just some of the things that I've done within the first 6 months, and there's more to come.
Yes, and that is the timeline that we were looking for, because Monique, Rome wasn't built in a day. Okay, so we have to take our time on moving forward with criminal justice reform and just all of the things that you mentioned. Now, time is up for us tonight, but again, as I always tell you, you have an open door with me, and I thank you again for giving me that redo. Last question for you, Monique, though, would be, how are we to reach out to you if we want to become a little bit more engaged in what is going on, even if we can't make it into the community engagement part of your office?
And that's really important because I want the community to understand that they will continue to have direct access to my office. So Keisha Mulford is my director of public affairs. She is my director of community engagement. And if you need to get to me, then you need to get to Keisha Mulford. And you can do that through the website at the State Attorney's Office. You can engage with us on Facebook, and you can call the State Attorney's Office. I see that the website is up on the screen. You can contact us there and ask for Keisha Mulford, who's the director of public affairs, and she can let you know how best that you can be involved in my office, or if you need to book me for something, she's the person to contact.
All right. Thank you so much, Monique. We love you. We're supporting you. We're behind you 100%. The timeline, we have to go with how it flows. And I need people to understand that. Thank you so much for being on with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. So don't go anywhere. We have another guest. 5 years ago on June 12th, we were having a block party downtown. I was still at the station, Star 94.5. And I can't fully remember who was on stage, but I do know that there was a moment in time when it seemed like time just stood still. And that was because shortly after we were letting out, a tragedy not too far from where we were was taking place. And that was one man taking the time to come to a club that we frequent often, and that's Pulse Nightclub. And in a matter of hours, this man murdered in cold blood 49 people, 53 others were injured, and a whole community stood up behind that devastation, and we have moved forward. Our mayor, Buddy Dyer, said that one incident will not define us, and he has supported the foundation for onePULSE, and that's what it's named now. And with us tonight is the man serving currently as the Vice President of Education for the National Pulse Memorial and Museum. As long as I've known Dr. Mowatt, he's been in school. He has been pursuing certification after certification, degree after degree, And he is one of the most phenomenally, intensely smart men that I know. And he's with us tonight. Dr. Mowatt, how are you this evening?
I am doing fantastic, Monica May, and thank you so much. Look, for the work that you do in the community, when they say it takes a village, you are the epitome of that. So it's an honor to be sitting here with you tonight to talk about One Pulse Foundation.
This is it's heartbreaking, yet God doesn't make mistakes, and that in itself is a statement, because you have cumulative things that are rolling through my head right now, and I'm sure it's been through you, because I lost so many friends. You, I'm sure, did as well. And then you have to take this tragedy and turn it into something that now becomes educational, that now becomes somewhat of a salve, a healing balm, if you will, for our community, for the LGBTQ community, for Latins, for African Americans, for men and women. How are you managing all of that?
I'm so glad that you asked that. Working at Pulse it's cathartic, right? So here's how I manage that. It can really get to you. I'm not even gonna hold back on that. It can get to you as we do the program, especially as we come around this time of the year. It's heartbreaking. But here's what I do, right? I capture the spirit of what we call our 49 angels, and I pour everything into the program. So before I launch a program, I say to myself, is this what they would, is this a reflection of them? Is this honoring them? And that's what drives me. That's what drives me. And that's where we get the outcome. So every program is gonna reflect the angels. It's gonna be energetic, it's gonna be, engaging, it's gonna be smart, it's gonna be all those descriptives that embody the 49 angels. And that's ingrained into each program. And we've been having really good outcomes from that.
It's interesting, because this has been 5 years working on how to make this really function and how to make this really impactful for our city. And you all have done a phenomenal job, because the programs that you all have put together, they target social issues, queer equality, gender identity, and equity, everything that you can think of. And it is a broad effect that our community just needs to stand behind and let it blanket them. And by that, I mean, just feel the love. Feel the love that you all are putting out there. Before our show is over, and we're not leaving anytime soon, we're going to post what the some of the activities are, because there are certainly a lot. I'd like you to speak to some of them, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the education program basically it's evidence-based, and it's called the Tribute program, right? So what that program does really, it creates harmonious interpersonal, or helps to engender harmonious interpersonal relationships, but where everyone can doesn't have to suppress the individuating characteristics that makes them whole and complete. So basically, what we're doing is we're creating really good work processes or interrelationship processes where you can be queer, you can be female, you can be counterculture, but in an appreciative manner, right? So it looks at us from the perspective that we're actually more similar, we are more alike than we are different, and that's a fundamental thing. It really is birds of a feather, right? I go back to when I was a kid. My best friend was Joey. Joey was Puerto Rican, right? And I was Black. I didn't know that Joey was Puerto Rican, but we were two peas in a pod. So what happens to us as we get older, right? And we get socialized, and all of a sudden these things become meaningful, and they become vices, skin color, ethnicity, and things like that, or even sexuality, right? But we're bringing it back through at One Pulse with the understanding that we actually are more like, let's go back to that wonderful time in life when we loved each other, right? What happened to that shared humanity? So we're bringing that back to the table, and that's being done with the tribute program, right? So we also have programs like the Conversation Starter Series. So we tackle issues that kind of fall below the radar. For instance, what they actually are, it's a film screening, and then we have a panel discussion with experts in it, right? So the first one we launched was in Valentine's Day, and it was called 90 Days. So 90 Days tackles a tough subject, HIV in the African American community. But here's the thing, it looks at it a little bit differently from the narrative. So now we're looking at a couple where he is a heterosexual couple, he is the male, she's the female, and she actually is the one that has HIV. Now that narrative is really told where it's heterosexual and the female, right? Boy, did that open up conversation. Why? Because it brought to an awareness that HIV really operates differently in different communities, right? So how it affects and influences whites is completely different from how it influences blacks, right? And in the community it is, right? Race matters. And also in a heterosexual light. So that it's different there as well. So we do these kind of presentations to kind of, let's get these things from underneath the carpet, bring them out and have a conversation so that we can heal.
What was the response to that? Because you're right, different ethnicities do respond to HIV differently. We actually did a tea based on HIV prevention and just having that discussion with teenage girls, African-American teenage girls and Hispanic girls and their moms. How are we defining the narrative for that, And it starts start early.
It's got to start, and that's why we do these conversation starters, right? HIV did not go anywhere. The statistics are daunting. The highest transmission rates right now are African American women, right, females. So this is why this was important. It was important. But what surfaced, collecting the data from people's responses, that they had no idea that the African American community was still experiencing. I don't want to say we're at a place where other cultures have moved beyond that. So I want to say a place of acceptance with HIV, but not really, acceptance, but an understanding that it's a chronic illness. Within the African American community, it's still considered highly stigmatized, right? So those that are not in the African American community didn't even understand that. How is it still stigmatized? So that emerged from the data collection that we did for that. So that's an important thing to understand, right? That even though we share the same planet, we're in different universes.
That's an interesting way to put it. What about the mental health stigma that came from those experiencing loss and just the never-ending grief surrounding the Pulse tragedy?
Well, there's going to be PTSD from that incident, but we still just move along with what it is that we are trying to do to bring back to that community, right? We try to use our resources to educate, and we do get the input from the people that were touched by Pulse to and feedback on moving forward. So we try to do what we can, and the wisdom here is you build the museum that preserves the history, and then you also have the memorial that retains the legacy of the angels that were lost. But it also does more than that, because it also speaks to the survivors, right? And those stories get told in the narrative as well, museum and memorial.
For months, almost a year after, and probably longer than that, the Orlando Regional History Museum had several of the artifacts, and I took some families there to see that. And it was interesting, different responses from different families. And I don't think that any of us will ever really forget that night. And in fact, I go back to two things that came out of that. The next morning, I was at church and I was sitting next to a police officer, matter of fact, and our church had moved over to Jones High School at that time, and she kept getting text messages. and her eyes were getting bigger and bigger after every, and it was only but so much she could tell me. And then my phone started going off, and it was the station saying, you need to get here right away. And so all of us came in different stages of Sunday's best, and we were locked down in that station for hours, most of us probably until the next day, just reporting and just updating, and just it was just something. And then the outcome of that, because of our, I would say, sincerity with how we handled it, the station was honored with a Gracie Award, and each of us individually were given an award for our reporting of the incident. But I didn't do it for an award. I did it because it was the human thing to do. We brought in mental health experts while we were on the air. We brought in the blood donations just to try and help with the physicality of what was going on. There were so many moving pieces, and it was a time that I really saw our community come together. And the next chance that we will get, if we go to what website, I know that one has been scrolling across the bottom, but what website, Dr. Mowatt, would you send us to get an update on all of the events that are going on to commemorate the 5th year anniversary of the Pulse tragedy?
Yes, it is onepulsefoundation.org, and there's a drop down for events, and just click that drop down for programs and events, and you'll see it all there. You'll be able to navigate there. But Monica May, I do want to add to what you just said. You mentioned something that everybody was in their Sunday best, right? Well, you know what? What the Pulse incident showed us was humankind's best. That's what it showed us. We all really came together, and we went back to that time that I was talking about in childhood, when we didn't see race, gender, sexuality, or anything like that. We saw a shared humanity. And that's what, as humans, that's who we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, the socialization process does a number to us that by the time we develop, right, all of that just whittles away.
We're different. Do you go into schools to do any kind of your socialization programming? I know that you speak around the country on race relations, but do you go into schools to talk with young kids?
Well, I mentored a lot, right? I do have a faculty background, so I was recruited from Bethune-Cookman University. Look, this is what faculty, we do, is mentor. Whether you're a teacher, educator, it's mentoring. And I always told my students this, right? In sociology, I said the first thing, look, let's not worry about your grades, right? Because this class that you're having right here, this is your life lessons class, right? This is the things that you're going to apply to the real world, right? So don't be concerned about, your grades. Be concerned about what you're learning, because these are the skills that you're going to apply. And that's what I share to every young person, is that, try to help them through mentorship, and, not to be too concerned and obsessed about, I don't want to say too, grades and things like that, but at the end of the day, what are you learning? And then, and even more importantly, what are you going to contribute back? And that's the reason why I got into the PhD program, right? Is to look, I did my career, how can I give back to the community? And I felt that through sociology was the key.
And you've done that with that. You published author on race relations and presenting research at conferences around the United. I mean, I'm just so proud of you, Earl. I really, really, really am. When I think of you, there was a place that you worked many, many, many years ago, and I would come to visit from time to time. And I'm trying to think of, was that a center that was? Do you remember?
It probably was a center where I was doing some work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I've been at places, but I've lent myself to different areas within the Orlando community, so it could have been one of like 100 places.
I'm trying to think, because I think it was a community center, and your head was down, and I'm just looking at this brother, and I'm saying, he just so wise and just so willing to share And that's one thing that I love about you, Dr. Mowatt. And thank you for being on the Orange County Mayor Jerry Deming's MLK Commission committee as well. I truly am amazed at how well connected you are and how much you give of yourself and your expertise in sociology, and you use it for the good of our community. So again, you can see the list, the full list of all that onePULSE Foundation and the City of Orlando are doing. You can go to monicamaycommunications.com. You can also go to onepulsefoundation.org. Any last minute comments from you, Doc?
Yeah, there's just one more, and I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Out Love Hate campaign that we developed at onePULSE Foundation, and so it's an opportunity for individuals to actually be part of the Pulse Museum once it's developed. So you just go to the website, and it's called outlovehate.com. And you get to upload your photo, and that photo gets immortalized on the building. It's an advertising thing that's going to be on permanent display at the museum. So to me, that's really exciting, right? So you become immortalized on this thing. So go to outlovehate.com and take a look at that, and you'll have an opportunity to put your photo up there and a message of love. So
I have that posted as well, Earl. So so people will get a chance, and I'll keep reminding them of that as well. Thank you. And there it is right now on the screen. Earl, thank you so much for being with us this evening on One Take Live. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And family, I wanted to tell you, thank you again to State Attorney Monique Worrell for giving me that do-over. We were off last week, and I got something to tell you. We're going to be off next week, too. I have to do something for the city of Orlando out at Shingle Creek, and that's on civil rights. So I'll be there moderating something for them. And that's something that we agreed to do back, believe it or not, in, was it 2019? I'm sure it was 2019 or, last year, 2020. And it just kept getting pushed off. And then when they finally gave the date, it fell on a Thursday night, and I had agreed. So I'm going to be off next week as well. For those of you that are wondering about Catering's Best, yes, we took some time off. We will be back June 12th, and we hope to see you all there with us. We have Jabari Clay that night. Again, I'm Monica May, One Take Live. We love you guys for watching every Thursday night on Facebook Live. Have a good evening.